It is a period of relative peace and prosperity in the galaxy. We're some 100 years from the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. Welcome to Fantha reaction chat for episode 3 of the Acolyte, entitled Destiny. My name's Mark, one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week on, let's just call it our own ascension ceremony, as it were, is my brother in the Force, Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm very well, mate, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about this episode because, spoiler alert, I thought it was fascinating.
I think that is a good way to refer to this episode. I think fascinating is definitely one that it will probably be used by I think many people in social media. Hopefully,
Yeah,
um, I think yeah, the whole episode is set 16 years before the present day in the Acolyte.
yeah,
So we basically flashback, and as to I think a lot of people had said, and I think we'd even said in last week's reaction chat, whilst Carrie Ann Moss's character Indira gets dispatched in the first 5 minutes, it wasn't going to be the last of her. And as we can see now, that she's very pivotal and central to the whole story behind May and Osha. So this episode is kind of, well, it's set on Brendok, the
yeah.
planet where Osha and May are apparently born. And yeah, it's quite an interesting kind of way to, I think, kick off. We're not even like halfway through the season, so we're going to get, I think, a lot more of these kind of flashbacks over the course of the next 5 or 6 episodes, I reckon.
I think we need to because the mystery has been set, and as we said on the last episode, we now know the two girls are twins and it's not the same person. That was sorted out quickly. We now know the mission that May's on to take out the Jedi, but now we're learning why. So for a brand
Yeah,
new show that's in the new era that can't lean on established characters, that seems to be striking out to mostly new planets. We've seen Coruscant obviously slightly adjusted for its time, but basically it's Coruscant. But everything else is new for the most part. Karlak, I think, has been around in fiction for a while, but you know, to do something like this, to have those two opening episodes on the same day, and then do this, which is a bold sweep back with again
mm,
brand new characters. To do that is, I think, quite ballsy. So yeah, I can see how some people might be a bit twitchy about it because it is all so fresh and it's so new, and obviously it's mostly female led in the cast, but very few exceptions to that, apart from when the Jedi turn up. But again, it's sort of part of lore that we've seen in Star Wars before. Witches are established. They're established in the
yeah,
Clone Wars. Rokur Gepta in the Lando books was basically a male witch, was like a sorcerer, similar type of thing, using powers that you would associate with the Force. And I think that's been fleshed out more in the intervening years. In Ahsoka, of course, with the Night Sisters. So witches in Star Wars are not a new thing, but to do what these did, to box themselves off, to do what Luke did basically on Acto, and just
mm,
lock themselves away from the rest of the galaxy just to quietly live their lives. And to tell that story again was quite brave, I thought.
yeah, very much so. I mean, as you say, I think if you were to have only seen the Star Wars saga movies, you're going to get a very kind of sharp shift, kind of a swift kind of surprise, really,
Yeah,
to what is going on. Because suddenly, like the saga films, especially, are very much a binary kind of notion of good versus evil, light versus dark.
very.
So then, to kind of insect this what everybody has really wanted for a long time, which is these grey Jedi, as it
Yeah,
were. But
yeah,
we know that Jedi aren't grey. It
yeah.
just means that basically they're
Morally grey.
morally grey. Yeah, but also it's like it's down to how the intent of the Force is being used. Are you using it to corrupt? Are you using it for selfish gains and stuff like that? So therefore, it becomes more about that. But this, yeah, again, they seem to have their own conversation with the Force. They kind of discuss it in ways of like you, with threads and
Yeah,
again, it's always based around this notion of destiny as well. So it's based around like your destiny is kind of tied to you and stuff like that, and like Osha and May's destinies are tied and that,
yeah,
and it's very interesting just seeing this kind of binary nature in this series, especially kind of be explored differently. We kind of have a perspective from the witches that the Jedi are inherently bad in this episode, and I think that's quite clear. And even down to the fact that the Jedi kind of agree, like they kind of come in and they kind of say, you can't be training children. And it's like, but and then the mother says, well, hang on a sec, we're not part of the Republic. Who are
Yeah.
you to say that we can't train our children? Now they don't even know how these children were brought about, which is an interesting kind of point to this whole episode anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, we kind of started to get these hints in the first two episodes of actually, does the galaxy in itself, do everybody perceive a Jedi as good, or are we now seeing that actually not everybody agrees that the Jedi are doing things for the right reasons?
We saw that in phase two of the Horror Republic, didn't we? When we took
Yeah.
that step back, when you start to see, I think it was the Path of the Open Hand and
Yeah.
groups like that, the other Force groups, and there were others, all sort of congregating on Jeddah. And I think it's very interesting now. And just as we chew through the episode, just the thought that there are these other Jedi sects, if you like,
Yeah.
Force sects, should say Force sects, not Jedi sects, Force sects, who don't necessarily. I mean, Mother Anasea basically says some. I think I wrote the quote down here. Some call it the Force. Basically that's not what they refer to it as. This
No.
power, but that's basically what the Jedi have framed it as, and they've given it its own yin and yang and all this to sort of protect the access to it, really. So when
Yeah.
they turn up on Brendok, this world that's locked itself off, to come and essentially take the twins, or take certainly the one that they're aware of, and then the other, does feel from. And it's all what Obi-Wan said in A New Hope, isn't it? Certain point of view, you're watching it from the witch's point of view,
Yeah.
and of course they've just turned up to take their kids. And as we learn, the most interesting element I found of all of it really was the fact that, again, in the same way that Shmi had Anakin with no father, you learn that Mother Anasea, helped bring about with Qual, I think the lady's name was.
Yeah. There's Brack. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, which is kind of ironic. That brought the twins about as well. So you're thinking, well, is this one of the dyad situations? Is it,
Yeah.
there's lots of things you think about, but I just couldn't help straight away just pitching right forward to the prequel trilogy and thinking, at about the same age, Anakin gets put in front of the council. They know
Yeah.
that, Qui-Gon will have told them that there's no father. So, this kid's this kid's
Mm.
special,
A
and they
virgins, you say?
exactly, and they
Yeah.
turn the kid down. But
Yeah.
just the pressure of the situation means that they kind of have to pivot a little bit. And in this era, of course, this is 100 years essentially before that. So, are the errors of Phantom Menace or the decisions in Phantom Menace clearly what's happening here retroactively is part of that decision making process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we I think George kind of alludes to this really, when he talks about the prequels and stuff, and I think even Dave Filoni mentions it. It's like, historically, history has this tendency to repeat itself on
Yeah,
one level or another. Like, it only takes a couple of generation gap for that the next generation to make the same mistakes in different ways, sometimes not necessarily as bad, and sometimes like devastatingly worse. And I thought it was quite interesting that the whole testing process was basically the
yeah,
same as what Qui-Gon does.
yeah,
He,
with the paddle and the yeah,
well, yeah, Torben takes the blood, so we're guessing at that
yeah,
point, the Jedi are aware of the midichlorians and their kind of like symbiosis kind of relationship, so therefore they're testing for strength for midichlorians in the blood. And then, like you said, you've got the paddle, and you've got like, was it a Lothcat, and I don't know, like
looked
a
like Cloud City, didn't it? That sort of
look, yeah,
station
exactly.
thing. Yeah,
And you kind of go, well, that's kind of obviously a nod and a flashback, but also it kind of shows that the traditions that we see in Phantom Menace are eons old, and
yeah,
I guess it's that whole notion of either whatever we get to the end of this season, the Jedi don't learn from it because they carry
yeah,
on making the same dumb mistakes for the next 100 years.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I think the biggest difference there is, and again, we don't necessarily know like the exact means and hows that Anakin came about, other than the fact that Shmi woke up one morning and she was basically pregnant.
yeah, yeah,
And is like, was that, we kind of start to get hints that maybe it was Plagueis and Palpatine kind of doing stuff in the background, but it's never been really confirmed.
No, not
Now
really.
we kind of have this much more explicit, conversation between the two mothers, and it's like, it sounds like they've corrupted the force to bring these two kids about. And what was quite interesting, and obviously very, they made it very obvious that all through this episode, like when there's the night, you've got those two twin
Yes,
moons, which is
yes.
like the orange and teal kind of like
From the
colors
logo.
of the logo. Well, exactly, of the logo as well. So it's all, it's all connected. And again, so it's, it's a Bogan and the Ashlar, it's like
Yep.
the darkest moon and the sun, yada yada yada. And I think clearly Leslie Headland's kind of set out to really show two very different personalities. You've got May, who's very kind of like headstrong and forceful, like even in the class, she's the one who's pushing back,
Yeah,
and Osha's kind of like being protected by her, almost to kind of standing behind her. So it's like, as a twin,
yeah,
I know what it's like. There's always one twin who is slightly more like, get up and go, and the other one's slightly more reserved and that. And it's kind of the same here.
totally.
Now, when it comes to me and my brother, I'm not going to say which one's good and which one's bad and which one started with fires when we were younger. But yeah, for me, obviously, that's quite interesting to see that kind of that
Yeah,
parallel actually like displayed on screen.
yeah,
And I think actually, I'm hoping anyway that the series so far has started to show a lot of a lot greater representation for like for minorities and that we haven't seen in Star Wars. I mean, there is that slight kind of in that nice Star Wars subtle way that like the two mothers clearly aren't just kind of like the heads of the cult. They seem to be like in a relationship,
yeah,
and there's
yeah,
a
yeah,
nice bit of affection there. So
yeah,
that's good to see that on screen. But also, um, like when the girls are being prepared for the ascension ceremony, you have the older darker skinned kind of witches. They're also doing the braiding and stuff, and that's
yeah,
kind of one of those things that is that's you know tied to like African kind of traditions and stuff like that. And so I thought that was really nice to see.
yeah,
And just on that note, the overall kind of costumes in this episode, I just thought were just stunning. I mean,
yeah.
especially the two mothers, kind of like fabrics and the hair and stuff. I thought was just like, again, it's the next kind of like iteration of seeing different things in Star Wars that actually you haven't seen before. And I think we just have to start to get used to being a little bit uncomfortable by some of these things. If you're of a certain kind of age and disposition, I think. So,
Totally, yeah. And there's been already today loads of
oh yeah,
mumbling and whining and blah blah blah, and it's just very boring. I find very
yeah,
boring when there's so much to drill into. A quote from Revenge of the Sith came to mind as I was watching it. The dark side is a pathway to some abilities many consider to be unnatural, and I think Mother Anastasia knows that she has kind of perverted the Force to create
mm,
these children because the way that they've locked themselves away, there's no access to probably any other way of continuing their bloodline, if you want to put it that way.
yeah,
Maybe that's not an option, or maybe there's more to her than we realized. May is more like a mother than Osha is. We don't know quite yet. You'd look at it on the face of it now when Anastasia says to Osha, as you said earlier, you've got to follow your destiny. This is what your heart tells you. It's very much what Shmi says to Anakin.
it did
Listen to
ring
your
very
heart.
similar. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
So to be in a situation like that, it's a terrible choice for Osha. And of course, she, as you said, I mean, I watched it with Ruth. Ruth's a twin, so she was picking out all the stuff you just said, very similar. Oh, by the way, I love your JJ lens flare. It looks really cool.
it's cool.
Really cool, really cool. And so she was picking up a lot of the stuff, and she really enjoyed the episode for that reason. That was what she was digging into
Yeah,
the similarities and the differences, and the way that even though you're essentially two kids from the same egg, sort of thing, that you can be very yin and yang and very different in your
mm,
perspectives. So for Osha to be the one that goes away, as we see at the beginning of the episode with that little translucent butterfly character, and she just pauses it and then lets it go, and then
yeah,
May comes in and she's holding it, and she's got that sort of look in her eyes, the very similar look that she had when she started the fire later on. You can tell that, as you said, which one started the fire when you were kids. Well, clearly we know May's the fire starter, but Osha kind
yeah,
of breaks her heart, doesn't she?
yeah.
They're not the twins, they're the only two kids there, but they're not as unified as May clearly thinks that they are.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's the thing. It's possibly sudden realization that your twin sister doesn't want exactly the same things as you, and that's, to be fair, that's what happens as you get older. One of you
Yeah,
goes into like liking heavy metal, and the other one can't stand it's into house and trance and stuff like that.
yeah,
It's just that's it's one of those weird kind of things that kind of happens. And May seems to be very happy to stay with the coven in that really cool kind of mountain
yeah.
volcanic kind of
It
like
was a good
hideout.
design, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, and and obviously Osha's like, there's more to the galaxy than this, and I kind of want to explore it. So, it's I mean, it's that in itself is a fairly classic kind of tropey story, which is a good kind of like foundation to build the rest of this show on. Um, I mean, as a young, well, yeah, as an older teenager, I mean, I spent my youth kind of watching stuff like Charmed and Three Sisters and that, and so I quite enjoy kind of the witchy coven-y type
yeah.
kind of
I was a
magic.
Buffy guy. I was
Yeah,
nuts about Buffy, and I was
yeah,
pushing 30 when Buffy started. So, I love that whole aesthetic and vibe and
yeah,
all that stuff
yeah.
is great. So I'm happy to have it in Star Wars.
I think so. I mean, it kind of works, and that's that's what we said at the beginning, isn't it? Like, there's so much more to force usage
Yeah,
and that, and I mean, and again, it's like, even that first opening shot, um with like the drone shot, basically, where it just
yeah,
kind of says like Bodok and 16 years later, man, you notice there's like the stones and stuff, and it's like, well, that's very similar to the stones that they saw, that they use as a gate to the other galaxy in Ahsoka.
yeah.
And and it kind of, and it all starts, they're using logical real world references. The like Stonehenge amount, was it used to commune with nature? Was it used as an astronomical kind of calendar, or was it there as just a ceremonial kind of thing, an altar, as it were? And as we see later on, they have this kind of ascension
Well,
ceremony.
that's a
So
brilliant point, really, because you think of the galaxy, there's going to be cycles, there's going to be iterations, if you like.
mm,
Everyone thinks of Anakin as the chosen one. He's only the chosen one of that generation. There's nothing to say. I mean, Palpatine says it in Rise of Skywalker. There hasn't been a dyad in generations. Depends on
yeah,
what your delineation of a generation is, really. How long's a
yeah,
generation? Is it 100 years? Is it 30 years? What do you consider a generation? I'm not quite sure of what the official, and would it be the same in the Star Wars galaxy anyway? But nevertheless, there's been wars and there's been peace and there's been dark ages like we've had here. So
yeah,
the galaxy cycles. So you saying that, it's a really good observation because I spotted them, but I didn't really think too hard about what they might be. There's every chance that on Brendok in the past, before the witches got there was a Jedi temple there at some point because it
yeah,
feels like there was so many Jedi temples that have just either been closed. I mean, Living Force, John Jackson Miller's recent book is brilliant, detailing the closing down essentially of one
mm,
of these temples as the galaxy or the Jedi really just retract back to Coruscant as its core
yeah.
base and just pop around the galaxy from there because goodness knows they've made hyperspace travel so easy now. Why was there ever the need to have a Jedi temple anywhere when you can travel from one side of the galaxy to the other in about 10 minutes seemingly? But that's a gripe aside of this. So I like that observation that there's other stuff there and they've just kind of picked up this because Master Inara says it, doesn't she? Indara rather says
Yeah.
it. Well, we thought this place was deserted, and that kind of doesn't really ring true, does it? And they all see through that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's from somebody who I think has always, I guess, championed the Jedi. It is slightly uncomfortable watching when you're kind of like, hang on a sec, actually, yeah, that's utter nonsense. Um, it just, I mean, obviously, I don't think we really know why they were there as such. I mean, I
No.
know, I mean, because it's odd because like they clearly got a bit of a camp going on, so they must be there for something. So whether or not like they've been asked to track down, or they've heard reports of these kids or something,
Yeah.
because that's the thing. Those that Witches Coven wasn't just made up of like one ethnicity. You
No.
had Twi'leks and Zabrak and that. So it's clearly it's wanderers who have kind of come together
Yeah.
and sort out like the coven and that. And
So
so
do you think then on that point, do you think the Jedi got wind of this coven because they kind of seem sort of familiar with it? Or do you think,
yeah,
because there's four of them, do you think they were just in that sector or in that system and they're all capable. They could have all gone off and looked for Jedi Padawan
Four
material.
Jedi, like four Jedi
Or
in
three
it.
Jedi and a Padawan, wasn't it?
Yeah, three Jedi on a Padawan seems like a bit of an overkill because
Yeah,
let's they're normally what we get in the books and in the films and stuff. It's like Master and Padawan go and sort out a local dispute or something,
yeah,
then
yeah,
everything kicks off. So
yeah,
to have three plus, let's say three and a half, or you could say four because Kalnaka is pretty tall,
yeah. That's true.
you kind of go, well, hang on a sec. So they're clearly expecting like they're going to need backup or trouble or something. So maybe again, it's just one of those things they're troubled by this sect, this coven, or they've
Do you think they're
heard.
threatened by it? Do you think they're
I
threatened
think
by it?
so, and I think this is his thing, isn't it? I think they kind of altruistically think that actually anybody who isn't a Jedi and isn't following their kind of their teachings and the Force
It's a
is
Sith.
potentially, well, not necessarily a Sith, but it's actually they run the risk of slipping to the dark side because they're
Yeah,
not managed properly,
yeah,
So that's what it kind of comes down to. So we don't know what they're being taught, we don't know what they're being told and stuff. And from maybe from the Jedi's experience again, we know what kind of happens that un managed kind of like force users eventually will cause a lot of harm and distress to the galaxy. So
yeah,
we're almost like proactively kind of going around and nipping out the
yeah.
bad buds and stuff. And
Because we do think they were the first, don't we? I mean, I think the James Mangold film is pretty much going to tell you. Well, that's an assumption, isn't it? Of course, we're assuming the Jedi were the first to access or be aware of the Force. Maybe we'll learn in that film that it was another. Well, I mean, the Jedi probably won't even. They won't exist at the start of it, will they? Of course they won't. That makes no sense. Somebody's gonna feel it
it's
for the
more
first
likely
time,
going to
and
be like
the
a
Force will
witch's
develop from
coven.
that.
Yeah, it's more likely going to be like a coven, something like that, like a small
Yeah,
group of people who might have, and again, it might have been ostracized, which is why they're kind of gone into hiding, because they're like, actually, we've been maybe kicked out of different, like communities
yeah,
over time, and this is a safe haven. We're out of the prying eyes of from a Jedi and just
yeah,
like Republic life. So it's yeah, I mean, and obviously this is the risk we're at, and the risk that we do have with a show like Acolyte, which is kind of subverting expectations quite heavily. Is
yeah.
that it's like whether or not we get to that point whereby we're just now subverting stuff, like just for the sake of kind of being a little bit clever, which I guess is one of the big criticisms where, say, like The Last Jedi was that it was, you can subvert an expectation, but like, do it for a reason. Don't just do it because that's your MO.
That's a perfectly good point, and I very much agree. And a lot of people are sort of equating the Acolyte with the Last Jedi because it's kind of going out on a limb. But I think also what we're seeing from the Jedi at this, and also it's a different era, it's a different
Mm.
time period, attitudes, politics, lots of things are going to have changed. Preeminent things in the sequel and the original trilogy won't be at the top of the bill at this time period. But to think, as you say, to think that the Jedi will assume that whoever's accessing the Force that isn't them is doing it for evil ends. We're watching a process of how, for example, a youngling is brought into the Order, and it always
Yeah,
seemed kind of. It was. If you look at Phantom Menace, and this is why I'm enjoying it because it's drilling, it's kind of going out into the weeds a little bit, but it's drilling
mm.
into stuff that we kind of know. When you think about Phantom Menace, the only reason they went to Tatooine was to fix the hyperdrive. They didn't know they were going to meet
No,
Anakin. That was just
exactly.
that was just fate, wasn't it? Destiny,
That's
whatever.
just the will of the Force.
It was the will of the Force, and
Yeah,
so that progressed as it did. And Qui-Gon taking Anakin was we. That's all we know because that's all we saw for years and years. There's
yeah,
probably a lot more formality to how that is done than what we saw in Phantom. That was kind of ad hoc. Qui-Gon's calling back. Good grief! I think I found the chosen one. I don't believe it. It was all very much of in the moment.
yeah,
Whereas this felt more organized, more formal, with four Jedi turning up. But also, I think they're probably expecting trouble. And when you see Torben go down, when he's obviously being taken, when his eyes go black, and maybe that's
yeah.
what screwed that one eye up. I don't know. But when you see that happen, you realise they're quite wise to be cautious in that sense because they're prepared to defend themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still don't know, like as you kind of say, we still don't know really the process and how people, get identified as force users.
Yeah,
It's so I mean it's an odd one really, isn't it? And I kind of like I quite like maybe that actually we don't necessarily need a formal way to know. I mean, formal
Yeah,
way to test, fine, because of benchmarks and it gives everybody the viewer an idea of actually how strong these people are. But actually, you kind of feel like if these Jedi are out in the galaxy, Matt, their chances are they're going to meet people who are most likely going to be force sensitive and stuff. And then it's
yeah,
like, what do they do? Is it down to each Jedi? Is that their instruction? Is down to you to kind of do the initial admin, to see if they're going to be like, potential candidates. But they just remember they can't be too old, they can't be this, they can't be that, and blah 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 blah. And oh yeah, by the way, they can't do the parents anymore,
yeah,
So and so therefore, but and this is a thing that you maybe I missed, and it might just be just down to necessity, as you said, because but what was the reason to bring these two sisters into you know to create them, shall we say?
yeah,
Was it to fulfill some potential prophecy, or was it just like as you said, just to propagate the bloodline because they're kind of like ostracized,
yeah.
or so it's really interesting, like what that in itself could mean, and so I'm looking forward to hopefully exploring that a bit more. But like we've kind of said, like this episode really kind of I think nailed down the fact that they're really focusing on this like certain point of view,
Yeah.
this Russia man kind of like story way of storytelling, like from Akira Kurosawa, where you see the same story from different perspectives. Because
Yes.
you know, right at the end, like May drops off into the abyss, Soul saves Osha, and then they kind of walk out past all these dead bodies. But like,
Yeah. Who killed them? Did
who
the
killed
Jedi
them,
kill them? Was it May that killed them? Did somebody else kill them?
or did they kill themselves?
Yes.
You
That's
know,
a great point. Yeah, it could be. Very
because
likely could be. Yeah.
because I mean, that whole because I mean, it wasn't until actually I was speaking to a friend of mine, Lindsay, afterwards, and she reminded me that that tree, was the Bowden tree, or no, the
The
Boonta
poison
tree.
that killed Torben last week.
Was killed, yeah, killed Torben, and you just go, well, actually, hang on a sec. So maybe they kind of go down that whole cultist thing of like,
Yeah.
we're not gonna, be captured. We're gonna take our own lives and just and commit suicide. Or because we then when we cut to it being in the ship, you kind of see like Torben kind of looks a little bit worse aware. I think he
Yeah.
started to talk about scar and all that already. So it's like we've definitely missed a big chunk of time,
Yes. More
So
flashbacks, I think, coming up.
gotta be right,
Yeah.
So that which will be interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if it's going to be from the Jedi's perspective or May's perspective, So, and I think it's just going to open the story even further up, So it's going to be really exciting to see.
It is. It really is. Just one more thing. It couldn't help but strike me as we were watching it that Palpatine has that whole speech in the Opera House in Revenge of the Sith when he tells Anakin about saving your loved ones and all the
Yeah,
powers and
yeah,
stuff that he's learned and the unnatural abilities quote which I mentioned earlier. And in Phantom Menace, as we say, Anakin comes along without a father, and we have always assumed or hypothesized. And again, if it's been nailed down in canon, I may have missed it, but I still think the assumption is that Palpatine or Plagueis or somebody was behind it,
had some
and
hand in it.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely some external hands. The Phantom Menace, literally. But I just think that this episode really is going to stand out in retrospect, not just for this season. And I know we're going to go, I don't know, but I feel that we're going to go back into the past again to fill in more gaps. But that this may be the moment where, because Palpatine's not just taking Sith teachings, he's taking Jedi teachings. So now, as we move into the next era of Star Wars, post Rise of Skywalker, let's say, and let's say whenever the film gets made, because it seems to be delayed. But let's say we get to the Rey film, and one of the
mm-hmm.
plot points of the Rey film is a resurgence of these other force sects, if you like.
Yeah,
So the resurgence of many, if not those new ones, and it's a force war. It's who has the power to control access, who's going to democratize the force, who's going to make this,
mm.
who's going to police it. It's that sort of conflict. And I think when you look back at Palpatine, I don't like talking politics, but it's a bit like, nearly 30 years ago when Tony Blair did New Labour. He took
Yeah, yeah,
elements of Labour and he took elements of other stuff and he kind of concocted it into this new package and called it Labour, and they won and were in power for however many years, 10, 11 years or whatever it was. So
yeah.
Do you know what I'm getting at? It just feels like Palpatine. I'm playing way forward because it is all going to connect, and we'll probably be dead by the time it all actually connects. But it will connect. That he's cherry picked skills and abilities from different arenas,
Mm.
and this feels like one that he's taken from that coven. So I kind of love
Yeah, yeah.
that they're like, we can't let this power get out. We can't allow this out in the galaxy. Evil people could use this, but somehow their teachings were written in a book or were somewhere, and you just making that point about Torbin's really on the nose and really spot on. There's a chunk of time we didn't see in this episode, and who's
Yeah.
to know what was taken, what was done, who died, who didn't in that moment.
Well, I mean, it's like it's to that point, isn't it? Whereby, his again, when we look at historically speaking, like the Middle Ages, like,
Yeah,
the rise of Christianity kind of came in, and you had the Crusades, and we're basically going into all these kind of like small kind of European villages and stuff, all these pagan villages, and just wiping stuff out. And then like some of that Christianity, like the dates like Christmas and stuff like that are
yeah,
born about from pagan dates and stuff. And it's like it's the merging of all these different religions into like one giant super religion. Or in this case, it's basically making sure that Palpatine and the Sith, when they do Jedi, like Order 66 and wipe out the Jedi, they maintain and control
yeah,
the, like, what resources are out there, so they've got the advantage. So if like Ray does set up or like, there's another group of Force users who just kind of come about, and they go on the holonet how to
yeah,
use a Force, there's nothing on there because it's all being kind of like controlled. It's all be stuff that Palpatine has kept and found useful, he's kept, and then stuff that he hasn't, he's destroyed, therefore wiping it out. So
yeah,
therefore you can get to that point whereby there is only going to be a binary kind of Sith and Jedi kind of situation
yeah.
until somebody starts to question it, which, like you said, might not be this lifetime, but hopefully it will be. So
Let's hope. Let's hope.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Definitely, there's definitely something in that the Empire tried to create a monoculture essentially, and now
Mhm.
you're weirdly looking at the Jedi in relation to the Force, kind of doing the same.
Possibly doing the same thing, yeah. And like I said, it's down to intent, isn't it? It's down to why you do it, and maybe it's policing the galaxy
Yeah,
in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. So it's like crime prevention, at the galactic level.
yeah.
So but I think probably we've ran our course for today for this.
We could
Like,
talk all day about
we
this.
could we could
The
talk all day,
listeners
but
have got
nobody
their
would
lives
want
to
to
get on with.
nobody would want to listen, and nobody would want to watch us like for the next couple of hours ramble on and stuff. But yeah, so I think that is all we have got time for this week's episode of Reaction Chat.
Yeah.
We will be back with making tracks on Tuesday
Yes, we
next
will.
week, and then hopefully with the gods and the Force and the threads and the path and everything else aligned, we'll be back for Reaction Chat next Wednesday at some point during the day. So
Sounds good to me.
until then, are you going to roll some pre-recorded credits or anything? Or
I'd never tell the listeners that, but yeah, of course I am.
cool, roll VT.